Sometimes we tell ourselves we are waiting for the right time, the right home, the right amount of money, the right business premises, the right level of success. Then we will create the environment we really want. But what if waiting for the right time is part of what is keeping the experience away? One of the simplest ways to investigate this is to look at your living and working spaces. Not merely at how they look, but at how you describe them. Because the words you use about a room may reveal something about the part of your life that room represents. Let me give you an example from our home office. My partner and I both work from home, running businesses together. What would ordinarily have been the main bedroom had become our office. It was functional. We had desks, computers, storage, everything we technically needed to work. But something about the room had begun bothering me. At first, this appeared to be a decorating problem. It wasn't. It was the beginning of an investigation. Let's begin with the mystery. Every investigation begins with something that no longer feels quite right. Perhaps it has been there for years, but suddenly you cannot stop noticing it. That is what happened with the office. So rather than immediately buying paint or moving furniture, I described exactly how the room felt to me. I said, "It feels soulless. It has no character or definition. I don't feel inspired when I'm in there. It feels cold and clinical. There is no color, and the room doesn't feel important enough to justify investing much energy into it. I don't know whether it would be worth the effort." That was my description of the office. But was it only a description of the office? This is where home as a mirror becomes interesting, because certain words stood out: soulless, undefined, uninspiring, not worth the investment. Those words sounded less like a decorating review and more like clues. So let's bring in the detective. When a room begins disturbing your peace, the temptation is to jump straight to the solution. Buy a new chair, paint the wall, clear the clutter. But before changing anything, I like to ask, what is this room making me feel? And then, where else am I experiencing those same feelings? Our office represented our place of business. So I began listening to my description as though it were evidence about my relationship with the business itself. The room felt undefined. Was the business fully defined? The room lacked character. Were we confidently expressing the character of our brands? The room felt soulless. Had parts of the business become functional but disconnected from our energy and enthusiasm? The room felt too insignificant to justify investment. Was there a part of me questioning whether the business was worth investing more of myself into? Suddenly, we were no longer investigating paint and furniture. We were investigating commitment, definition, value, and the amount of life we were willing to bring into what we were creating. Let's identify the suspects. Once I listened carefully to the description, several hidden feelings began stepping out of the shadows: apathy, lack of definition, hopelessness, feeling uninspired, a belief that the space, and perhaps the business, was too small to justify much effort. There was also an unspoken calculation underneath it all. What if the energy I invest is greater than the return I receive? That was important, because it explained why the room had remained unchanged. The problem was not that we did not know how to decorate an office. The problem was that part of me had not decided whether this part of our life deserved more commitment. The physical size of the room was almost a red herring. The office could have been 10 times larger, and I might still have felt the same reluctance. The room was simply giving the feeling somewhere visible to live. What experience was missing? Once we had identified the feelings present in the room, the next question became, what did we want to experience instead? We wanted the office to feel energized, inspired, defined, alive, spacious, like a genuine place of business. This matters because changing a room is not really about acquiring the correct objects. It is about becoming clear about the experience you are trying to create. Otherwise, you may spend money, move furniture, and paint walls without shifting the feeling that bothered you in the first place. My strongest immediate desire was color. That sounded simple enough. But the moment I considered choosing a color, several new suspects appeared. Procrastination, fear of making the wrong decision, fear of wasting money, fear of making a mistake. The paint shop was less than a 10-minute walk away, and yet it took me almost a week to collect some samples. That delay was evidence. Not evidence that I was lazy. Evidence that a very small decision was carrying a much larger emotional weight. Eventually, I collected the samples. It did not take long to feel which color I preferred. But then another fear appeared. What if it looks terrible on the wall? What if I choose wrongly? What if we regret it? It looked like a conversation about a pot of paint. But fear of making the wrong decision rarely confines itself to decorating. It can quietly filter into business choices, creative ideas, purchases, offers, and opportunities. The paint was simply making the pattern easier to see. Then an accomplice arrives. I brought my partner into the decision. When he asked why I was hesitating, I told him, "I'm worried it might be a mistake." His response was immediate. "So what? We'll paint it again. It's only a pot of paint." That sentence changed the scale of the decision. I had been treating the choice as though it needed to be permanently correct. He reminded me that it only needed to be tried. The cost of choosing imperfectly was not disaster. It was another pot of paint. This is one of the valuable ways relationships can act as mirrors. Another person may bring a quality into the situation that we are struggling to access ourselves. In that moment, my partner brought grounded action. He's playing the role of the masculine, turning the feminine unordered potential into concrete form and encouraging permission to move before certainty arrived. The question was no longer, "What if I get it wrong?" It became, "What becomes possible when I am willing to adjust?" The resistance makes one more appearance. Even after that conversation, it took me another 3 days to order the paint. And when I finally went online to buy it, the browser began playing up as I reached the payment page. Previously, I might have taken that as a reason to stop. Perhaps this was not the right time. Perhaps I should return to it later. But because I had already recognized my tendency to delay the decision, I treated the technical problem carefully. Was this genuinely a sign to stop, or was it simply an inconvenience arriving at the exact moment I was already tempted to retreat? I completed the order, and that same day, another idea arrived. The newly colored wall needed definition. What if we created a large sign that clearly identified the room as our place of business? That idea brought up a new level of commitment. A sign required us to choose the words, the message, the logo, the identity we wanted to see every day. We could no longer leave the brand vague. The wall was asking us to define ourselves. The investigation expands. Once the sign was underway, other ideas began arriving. What about branded desk mats? What about introducing images connected to our personal passions? What could we place in the room that would continue giving something back to us emotionally? While discussing a picture for one wall, my partner looked down at the cabinet holding the printer. "I don't like this cabinet," he said. "We need something better." This was not a new problem. We'd measured that space before. We'd searched for replacements. Nothing seemed to fit all our needs. On another wall stood 3 large, white, double-doored cabinets. Suddenly, I had an idea. What if we move one of those cabinets into the printer space? We both immediately assumed it would be too large. We'd already concluded that it wouldn't fit. But this time, instead of debating it, we decided to move it 2 meters and find out. It fitted perfectly. We stood looking at it for several minutes, laughing and shaking our heads. The solution had been sitting in the room all along. We hadn't needed a new cabinet. We needed the willingness to test an old conclusion. Within half an hour, the old printer cabinet had been lifted into the car and taken to the recycling center. A problem we had lived with for years disappeared. Because we moved one piece of furniture 2 meters, then came the domino effect. Moving the white cabinet opened up a corner of the office, and that empty corner changed how the entire room felt. It seemed more spacious, much lighter and brighter, as though we'd gained several square meters without increasing the physical size of the room at all. Then another thought arrived. The space needed more life. Plants. My partner suddenly said, "I want one of those plants that helps clean the air." This surprised me. He'd never shown much interest in plants before, but that's what began happening. As we brought more presence and care into the office, we started noticing possibilities we hadn't previously considered. We went to look at plants and returned with the car full. The business sign was delayed in transit. For a moment, that delay could have become another story. Perhaps the business was not ready. Perhaps we were resisting expansion. Perhaps something unseen was holding the change back. But the honest answer was simpler. We didn't know why it was delayed. The important thing was not to build another fearful conclusion around it. The sign eventually arrived safely. It went onto the wall without a problem. The paint felt right. The plants brought life into the room. The furniture worked better. and the office finally began to feel like a deliberate place of business. So what actually changed? This is where we move beyond paint, signs, cabinets, and plants. Because the real value of the project was not the collection of objects, it was the experience that had been created. When we entered the office, our attention was drawn immediately to the colored wall and the sign defining who we are. The room felt more spacious, more focused, more alive. It had stronger boundaries. It was no longer simply a spare room containing desks. It had become our place of business. And the changes in the room were accompanied by changes in how we worked. There was more calm, more focused action. We found it easier to let go of parts of the business we'd continued automatically, without asking whether they still mattered to us. We made decisions more confidently. The business felt better defined because we were becoming clearer about who we were and who we weren't. Did a pot of paint magically change the business? No. The paint was part of a larger process. We noticed what felt wrong. We listened to the language we were using. We identified the feelings hidden beneath the practical problem. We recognized the resistance that appeared when we tried to act. And then we created an environment that reflected the experience we wanted to embody. The room didn't do the inner work for us. It gave us somewhere tangible to practice it. So what's the real reveal? Changing your life is rarely about one perfect action. It doesn't matter whether the action is painting an office, clearing a basement, changing your diet, going to therapy, ending a relationship, joining a gym, or attending a course. The action is not automatically the transformation. The transformation begins when you understand what the action is meant to change inside your experience. Our office was not merely lacking color. It was exposing a lack of definition. The paint decision was not merely delayed. It was exposing fear of making the wrong choice. The cabinet was not merely inconvenient, it was exposing a conclusion we just hadn't tested. The room was not too small. Our thinking about what was possible inside it had become too small. And that is why your home can become such a powerful mirror. It makes the invisible visible. It gives hidden feelings a shape, a location, a physical scene where they can finally be investigated. So look at the room that keeps disturbing you. Listen carefully to the words you use to describe it. Then ask, what part of my life does this room represent? Where else do I experience these same feelings? What have I already concluded without testing? And what small physical action would allow me to practice a different relationship with myself? Because sometimes the thing you are waiting to create is also waiting for you to decide that it is worth creating now.